All right, I'd like you to introduce you to Sue Nichols, who is a visiting professor right now at NIE. We're very, very happy to have her. Let me tell you just a little bit about her. She's the Associate Head of Research at the School of Education at University of South Australia in Adelaide. She's a literacy researcher. She's the Associate Head Research in the School of Education. She's authored and edited books, chapters, and articles with literacy participation, learning and resources across multiple sites. One of her most recent publications, which I think you'll be talking about at NIE, is Mobile and Placed Resources, Language and Literacies in Mobile and Placed Resources, Routledge 2017. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Sue.
Thanks very much. Is it my imagination or has it gone a bit dark in here? Okay, all right. Thank you. Can you all see enough to do writing and things? Okay, thank you very much. Now, I'm thinking warm thoughts and, I'm really going to control myself and not go like this while speaking because that's not a very good look. Before I came to give this presentation, I wasn't too sure whether the work that I do would really fit with the other presentations, and now I'm feeling very reassured because I feel that I can make some strong connections with, I knew that the connections with Chin E's work, but with the other speakers as well. So one of the things that we've been hearing about today is this very serious issue of a gap, an equity gap, that's related somewhat to poverty, and it's related to other forms of capital as well. So when we think of poverty, we think of differences in economic resources, but also there's differences in terms of social and cultural capital. So the people that I work with and spend a lot of my time thinking about how I can engage with is parents and family members who reside in communities that are called disadvantaged. Now, I'm always very careful with my language because I don't want to be implying a deficit view of these families and these communities. Because from all the work that I've been doing over many years now, I've learned a lot from the members of these communities. I have developed a great respect for their resources and for their knowledge, and particularly for their care of their children, their aspirations, their very sincere desires for their children to succeed in life. So that's something that I always keep in mind, and when I'm working with my students who are going to be teachers, it's something that I continually encourage them to keep in mind as well. Because, sometimes when we see those performances, those differences and gaps in performance, we're aware of a group of students who aren't doing so well. As educators, we really are concerned about that. Sometimes the way that we express our concern can shade into a kind of critical view of the families and parents. With the best of intentions, we can find that that this happens. So I've titled my talk "Community Connections for Literacy Equity." In Australia and probably in Singapore as well, there's been a lot of emphasis on partnership policies, and there's a lot of tokenism around partnership. A lot of lip service being paid to partnership. And the reason why I use the term connections rather than partnership is, to me, connections is a more resonant term. It's a more flexible term. It's not something that can necessarily be dictated by policy. And you can't always tell what form a connection is going to take when you enter into a community, when you begin to engage with the children and the families. So connection to me is a nice open term that means that we see what connections emerge, and also that we try to inquire and discover the connections that already exist. So this is what I'd like to try and get through in the next 15 minutes, to look at key principles of community connections, and then I'm going to share 3 examples with you. Now, these are all examples of projects that I have personally been involved with, so I'll be speaking from my personal experience, and they're very practical and often quite modest sort of projects. I'm not making big claims about these projects. I just wanted to share them with you because the communities and the people that I work with are those that are often termed hard to reach. So if we achieve some small steps with some of these communities, that's actually large steps, in fact, because it takes quite a while to build the trust and to develop those connections. So the community connection approach that I'm talking about is motivated by an awareness of the inequitable achievements of Australian children from disadvantaged communities. We heard Charles talking about the long tail, and we also have this long tail in Australia, and it's still far too long. So we still have a lot of work to do, and this is what I tell my pre-service educators, that they have to go out and they have to actually actively work to build a more equitable education system for our children. So the approach that I'm talking about has certain aims. It aims to be respectful of parents' knowledge of their children. We want to be careful not to impose our values, the values of the dominant group, but on the other hand, we don't want to assume that that these values are not shared. For instance, if we say to ourselves, we as middle-class educated people, we value education and we believe in hard work and so on, we wouldn't want to assume that these values are not actually shared by those people who are not members of the dominant group. The community connection approach needs to be relevant to the lives and interests of families, and in the last talk that Rihanna gave, I was really impressed by the sustained and sincere committed efforts of the National Library Board to really, maintain that relevance, to strengthen that relevance, to try all kinds of different ways to actually engage and hook onto the interests of, in this case, children and youth, but I extend that also to include parents and families. And this approach needs to be sensitive to the complex challenges that some families experience. The families that I sometimes work with are families where with all of the best intentions, you set up an event or an activity and people say that they would like to come, and then you find out that there's been a complex health issue, someone had to take someone to hospital, or somebody has had, their sister has left all their children at someone's house to look after. Now they have to look after all of those children as well as their own children, and they can't, or their car has broken down, they can't afford to get it fixed, they can't, or they're just, feeling very depressed that day, and it's just really just hard to leave the house. So these are complex challenges, and working with these communities, being sensitive to these challenges requires a lot of patience. And it also requires that you don't take it personally if the challenges in people's lives prevent them from participating. It's very easy, and I hear teachers talk about this, purely out of disappointment because they try really hard to create these events. If people don't come, they start to say things like, those parents don't care. We have to be very careful and interrupt ourselves when we're having these thoughts. Okay, so this is my first example. It's parent-child bookmaking. And this is something that I have facilitated myself, and I have done that in a number of different sites. So what's the beneficial about parents and children making books together? Well, when they do this, they have to apply their understanding of the structure and function of books. You have to know a little bit about how a book works in order to be able to make one. And most people do know something about how books work, even if they're not readers themselves. They also need to use languages and images to express ideas. So they have to make linguistic choices, they have to make design choices in terms of what they're going to put into that book. When they do this, they gain insights into how authors do their work. In my own observations as an educator, I think one of the differences that divides the readers and the non-readers is that there's a kind of mystification around how books are even produced. The idea that books are created by people like ourselves who are authors, and not even necessarily professional authors. An autobiography might be that person's one and only book in their life. It's also a team effort by designers, by illustrators, by publishers, by editors, and so on. All of this activity goes behind the making of a book. And if you make a book yourself, you begin to understand what is going under the scenes. And also, when parents and children collaborate to create something, they're both learning. They're learning together, and what we hope is that they're learning without critical judgment or pressure. Children are not critical of their parents if the parent, isn't very good at drawing or made a spelling mistake. And parents can learn how to not be critical of their children if they are supported in this process. We know that parents can be quite critical of their children, and that can be a bit of a killer for, participation. So in this case, when we support parents to support their children and vice versa, then it becomes a more enjoyable activity. And also with bookmaking, we can use traditional materials or we can use digital technologies. So when I was facilitating e-book making sessions, I have done this at suburban libraries and also at schools. And those who had their own iPads could bring them, and also we would supply iPads. The University has got a set of iPads that we use, and sometimes the libraries also have iPads they can supply. We use the My Story app. It's a very accessible app. The parents who had their own iPads were informed to download that app ahead of the sessions. And the good thing about this app is that it is a multimodal app. So it enables the use of audio recording. You can type, you can draw using your finger, and you can take photographs and insert them into the book. And you can do all this from inside the app. So in order to support the parents and to structure the bookmaking, they were taught a simple structure for creating a story. And they were asked to allow the child to make decisions and not to try to produce the perfect book. Some parents feel that there's some kind of a standard that they have to reach, and so it's necessary to inform parents that in fact it's the process of doing it that where we do the learning. And if you don't even finish or complete your book, it doesn't really matter because you learn something anyway. Now, I don't know whether you can see that. It's a bit hard to see, but that is a mum and her child, and they've come down onto the ground so that they can get on the same level to be able to access the screen. And this is an example of a page from an ebook that was created. Sticky the dog is playing in the tree and is having lots of fun. And you can see there that there's an incorporation of photography, drawing and typing. Here's another example. This is the first part of a story. Once there was a fire-breathing dragon. So I just want to unpack a little bit what went behind the scenes, like how was this created. So it was created by a 4-year-old child and his mother. So the mother first guided the child with questions about what the story could be about, and this was modelled by myself as a facilitator. The child used the puppets as characters, and the mother took photos while he was manipulating the puppets. And then the child added the drawn element, so you can see there the flames coming out of the mouth of the dragon. The child also wrote using his finger, and the mum helped him with the spelling by dictating the words. So the child wrote roar, and then the mother wrote the print element as dictated by the child. So it was a fully collaborative effort. Now, I know you're probably dying to know what happened to the dragon, so I will show you the rest of the story. It's not that long. So one day the dragon found that he couldn't breathe fire anymore. So you see here, those of you that are educators and understand how a narrative works, there always has to be a complication. So part of the framing of the session for the parents was to explain to them, this is how a narrative works. You know, you start with your characters, you need to have a complication. This was it. Oh, no! So the dragon went to see the giraffe. That's probably because, the giraffe happened to be another puppet that was available. The giraffe waved his magic wand. Suddenly the dragon could breathe fire again. The end. So it's got everything you want in a narrative. It has a resolution to the complication. It has the interaction between the characters. So I'm going to now move on to my second example, and I'll scoot through this quite quickly. So this project was called the New Word Hunter Project. Children's reading comprehension can be limited if they don't have a sufficiently developed vocabulary, because if a lot of the words that they're encountering in their texts are unknown to them, it can really kind of slow them down in their ability to process that text and make meaning of it. In Australia, children from disadvantaged backgrounds often have more limited vocabularies, and this is something we can confirm from our testing. And also, children who begin learning English at a later age than their peers need to catch up in their vocabulary development. This is something we find, for instance, with immigrants and with people who come to Australia as refugees. Many of them are very skilled linguists in a bunch of languages, but their children might be beginning to start to learn English, in grade 2, whereas, of course, Australian peers have been learning it since birth. So the New Word Hunter project was designed to engage parents and children in vocabulary building outside of school. So this is, one of the challenges that I gave myself and I continue to give myself is, the question was asked, how do you take that outside of school? Or how do you know that it's going on outside of school? So this is, what I wanted to do. So the project targeted 6-year-old children and provided resource packs with books. The books were specially selected for their rich vocabulary. Book selection was very important in this project because when we looked at books, a lot of books that were being made available to children in their school classroom were very impoverished in terms of their vocabulary. So they're not really going to do the job in terms of building children's vocabulary. And we conducted an intervention study which we've just completed, so I haven't done any publication about that yet. All right, now I don't know if you can see this very well, but this was the parent leaflet that went with the first resource pack. I'm just going to go up there and, I can't really because I'd be skating on that curvy thing, wouldn't I? Just to sort of explain what that is. So it shows the parents what are the contents of the pack. And it does this visually, so we try to use visual cues as much as possible. What you can see in that little square there is some of our concrete materials. We provided the parents and children with magnetic strips that were blank. And these magnetic strips were there for the purpose of writing words on. And we use magnetic strips because they can go up on the fridge, and we know that the refrigerator is kind of a family text, right? It is where you put things that you want people in the family to notice. We also provided sticky notes for people to annotate the books. And this is the second flyer that went out with a second resource pack where we gave a little introduction to our books. So we had in each resource pack one fiction and one non-fiction book. And we've also given parents a few pointers as to why we should look at vocabulary and how you can assist your child. These are some of our activity cards which we developed specifically for the project. These were in a postcard size and they were put into the resource packs. So here what we tried to do was to expand beyond accessing books to a range of other types of experiences where children could encounter new words. One of the fathers in the project told me that he and his son had taken on board the challenge of finding a fruit or a vegetable or a food item for every letter of the alphabet, and the only one they couldn't find was X, and then the little boy said, "But I'm Xi." That was his name. So you see, I said, only if you're a cannibal. All right, so here's some of our parent feedback, and you can see from the parents' comments, which they wrote, the kinds of benefits they're getting from this project. In fact, parents found the idea of hunting for new words very relatable, whereas previously when we had tried to engage parents with the idea of reading comprehension, it was much more difficult to translate that into terms which parents could understand, and particularly the parents that we're wanting to deal with. But a meaning of a word is something that is, you can really grab hold of. And we made it possible for them to grab hold of it literally by providing them with concrete materials. So we're very happy with the parent feedback. And the other thing was, regardless of the parent's level of education, this is the kind of feedback we were getting. So I'm very pleased that parents who, for instance, had only gone as far as year 10 in high school were still finding this approach really helpful. And finally, I'll just talk a little bit about the issue of access to books. We've mentioned this a few times today, But we do know that children in disadvantaged areas have less access to books. And even when there's a library, we know that parents are reluctant to take their children there because they fear the loss of the book, they worry about their child's misbehaviour, and they think they're going to be judged by the other parents. So I've been working in the regional city of Whyalla, which is a place of high disadvantage. Things are starting to turn around, thankfully, but for a while there was a loss of employment that was quite severe. The council closed 2 local library branches because they were kind of, falling to bits. And they decided to put up a beautiful new library, which if you went into it, you would go, this is wonderful and state of the art. But the thing was that the people that were living in the most disadvantaged area of town didn't want to go there. They had got used to their own local library, and some of them didn't even realise that there was any replacement library that had been provided. So they're still telling the story out there as, oh, we lost our library. They feel like it got taken away and nobody consulted them. So what we did was we created the Whyalla Book Trail, which is a leaflet, and in order to create this leaflet, Louisa, who's a Whyalla-based research assistant, went around the town and accessed every outlet where you could find books that were either free or very cheap and reasonably priced. This is the Whyalla Book Trail, so you can see it's a map of the town that's been annotated to show the locations of books, because these are books that parents, regardless of their level of income, will be able to afford, and they'll belong to them, so it won't really matter if their children lose them or whatever they do with them. So those are the 3 projects that I wanted to share with you today, and that's the end of my talk. I want to acknowledge my funding partners. The Ian Potter Foundation is a charitable organisation, and the University of South Australia funded the Whyalla Book Trail. There's my email address if anybody would like to get in touch, and I can provide you with more information. And I guess all I have to say now is thanks for your attention.